today to share my story. So I like to start the speech by telling you guys something about myself. So 591 days ago today, I experienced my first heartbreak. And I was rejected by who I thought would be the love of my life. And at that moment, I thought, okay, my world has fallen apart and I didn't know how to be happy anymore. And I'm sure for those of you guys out there who have experienced rejection by your boyfriend, this is what something would feel like. And at that moment, I thought I didn't know how to be happy anymore. For a few weeks, I even thought about transferring halfway across the country to another school so I wouldn't have to face it every day. And it was ridiculous, honestly, how a simple rejection, a 3-letter word of let's break up, it turned my world upside down. And that's when I started to wonder, how is it merely possible that a rejection coming from a 15-year-old ordinary boy, how did that make me question everything I believe in? And how is it possible that the impact of his rejection, it just turned my world upside down? So the thing about rejection is that we've all experienced it before. It's something that's guaranteed to happen to all of us, and it's something that we can't avoid. Sitting here today, from being an infant to a middle schooler to an adult to even when you're older, rejection is something that we're going to continue to experience in our life. We can do everything right, we can do everything perfect, but somehow we're still at the risk of being rejected. And while rejection is not the most uncomfortable experience, it still stirs up uncomfortable feelings. And we feel that we're not enough. It's easy to jump to the conclusions that you weren't good enough, that you weren't smart enough, you didn't try hard enough, and there are people out there who are better than you when we're rejected, because we're left in a vulnerable position. And we are begged to self-reflect and look into what went wrong. And this is uncomfortable for all of us because it exposes parts of ourselves that we like to conceal. And being left in a vulnerable position means that our self-esteem, our egos, and what we feel confident about comes into question. And for me, the most terrifying part is that rejection shatters the idea of the future that we've imagined. As human beings, we like to be in control of our own future. We like to have an idea of what our future is going to look like, what paths we're going to take, so that it's not so scary for us. And it can be daunting when we don't have an idea what our future is going to look like. But what rejection does is it comes in and rips all that away. Suddenly, within a blink of an eye, you don't know what your future is going to look like anymore. So I'd like to take a moment here to ask everyone a question. What do you think would be your biggest rejection? And let's take a moment to think about that. For you guys sitting there, it might be being rejected by your dream university, which you guys are applying for right now. And for the adults in the back, I'm sure it might be, okay, let's say being rejected by your boss for a promotion. And for, let's say high schoolers, it might be being rejected by your crush when you're confessing. And the truth is that there's no definite answer to this, and there's not a unanimous answer that we can all agree to. But there's one thing that stands between us as a common ground to this. And it is that there's a need to confront rejection. And there's a desire that we must confront rejection because it's terrifying for all of us. And while rejection may not be the most uncomfortable feeling, like I mentioned, we must find a way to embrace rejection because it's something that we're going to continue to experience. Okay, so while rejection is something that we have to experience, it's important that we find a way to confront it. So the truth of the matter is that excruciating experiences can be crucial in our self-development. And I've learned to shift my perception of rejection in such a way that it doesn't scare me anymore. And in order to accept rejection, there are certain things that we have to teach ourselves and certain things that we have to cement into our mind. And so today, I hope to share with you guys how to find a healthy coping mechanism to respond to rejection. Okay, so when I was writing this speech, the first thing I thought of was Googling what rejection meant. And that Google says, the dismissing or refusing of a proposal, idea, etc. And at first glance, this definition seemed ambiguous. I didn't know what it had to do with rejection. But then I thought about it, and okay, there's one part I do agree with this definition, and that is rejection is a fact that cannot be changed. And so today, I want to write a new definition of rejection for everyone. And I'm going to define it as a rebirth and realization. Now you might be thinking, okay, these two words are literally completely opposite to rejection, so what does this have to do with that? So we have to understand that our reactions to rejection is a process. It's a series of emotions that we will feel, a problem that we have to face, a vulnerability that we have to accept, and a story for us to write. Rejection and accepting rejection is not something that we can just jump to. It's not just, okay, let's just go there and then we're already there. There are hoops you have to get through. And finding a balance in accepting rejection is a process. The first thing that I felt when I was rejected was shame. I was ashamed of myself. I was ashamed that I wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough of a girlfriend for him. I wasn't a girl that he wanted. And this is the first feeling that floods into your mind when we're rejected, shame. We are ashamed of our egos being bruised, and we feel immediately embarrassed. And why is that? Why do we feel shame? Shame is easily understood as the fear of disconnection. Is there something about me that if other people see, we won't be worthy of connection? And this is when we begin to fear. We fear losing our future. We fear that we're not good enough. We fear that there are people out there who are better than us. And we fear that we're never going to be good enough. I fear that I wasn't going to be happy anymore when I was rejected by him. And that's normal. It's okay. As human beings, we fear. We fear because fear is an innate feeling and it's built into our human nervous system and it works just like an instinct. But one thing about fear and shame is that it stems from the same common root cause. And what is that? That is vulnerability. When we feel shame and fear, we are vulnerable. We are left in a vulnerable position. Underlying that feeling of, I'm not blank enough, which we all know. I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not thin enough, I'm not beautiful enough. Underlying this is what we call vulnerability. When we are vulnerable, we are ashamed of ourselves and we are ashamed of our egos being bruised and what we feel confident about. At the same time, we fear. We fear that we're not good enough and that there are people out there who are going to replace us. And it is in fact these two emotions that encompasses what we call vulnerability. And this is what makes rejection so terrifying for all of us. It is the fact that underlying rejection is vulnerability. How many of you guys here think of the word vulnerability and weaknesses synonymously? The majority of you guys, I believe. And this is why we fear rejection so much. We live in a culture that tells us they're never enough and that we are never going to be good enough. So we face rejection with resistance and intolerance. We put up a fight to rejection and we put up a fight when we're vulnerable. So today, I want to redefine vulnerability for you guys as well. And I'm going to define it as exposure, uncertainty, and an emotional risk. So while vulnerability is the core of shame, fear, and the struggle of worthiness, it's also our birthplace of joy, love, and belonging. And vulnerability is the most accurate measurement of courage. And accepting vulnerability is a way of power itself. And this is what we need to practice doing. And embracing our vulnerabilities would be the hardest part for rejection for everyone out there. When I was rejected, and yes, sorry, you guys, we have to go back to the story again. I was ashamed of myself, and I thought that I would never be good enough for a guy anymore. I needed that recognition so bad that I was left in such a vulnerable position. I thought that I would never be worthy of love anymore. But the thing I did differently was that I admitted that, yeah, I was weak and I was in a vulnerable position. And I accepted my faults and I accepted that, yes, maybe I just wasn't the girlfriend he wanted. And this is what I did differently. Because the truth is, rejection is it's a fact that can't be changed. It's already happened. And it's opposite of rejection, on the opposite spectrum, it's acceptance. So instead of resisting and pushing away our vulnerability, what we need to do is we need to embrace them. We need to embrace our faults, and this is what I did differently. Because when we embrace our vulnerabilities, we gain courage and we have strength. We have the courage to be imperfect, and we have the compassion to be kind to ourselves first, then to others. And we need to learn to open ourselves to vulnerabilities, and we need to be okay with being weak, and to practice to show it instead of hide it. When we are rejected, the first thing we do is we hold our fist tightly, and the truth is there's nothing in our fist, it's blank. But when we open it, we embrace our vulnerabilities. And this is something I feel like all of you guys should understand, is that what makes us vulnerable is what makes us who we are, and it's what makes us alive. And practicing to embrace our weaknesses itself, it's a demonstration of power, and this is what makes us strong. And we need to let ourselves be seen, to be deeply seen, to be vulnerably seen, to love even though there are no guarantees, and to practice joy in moments of terror. Because what makes us vulnerable is what makes us alive. And when we accept rejection, we allow ourselves a new chance to rewrite our story. So when, let's say, you're rejected from Harvard, okay, maybe another school shows up, Yale shows up. The thing about rejection is that when option A is gone, option B will always shows up, and this is when you have the power to rewrite a different ending and a different future for you that you would have never gotten if you weren't rejected. And this time, you're in control. You are the author, and you have the pen in your hand, and you get to write a different ending for you. And you can develop a story when you're rejected. I learned to embrace my vulnerabilities, and I accepted that, okay, that just was not my relationship. That just was not the guy for me. And maybe, okay, I didn't find someone after that, but I rewrote a new ending for myself. I learned to be okay with being alone, and that's something that I would have never gotten the chance to learn if I wasn't rejected by him. And I embraced all of my faults. And then this time, I gained something different. One thing my parents always tells me is that the most important, valuable lessons in life, schools don't necessarily teach us. How to handle a breakup, how to interact with different people, what to do when you're left in a weak position. This is something I've grown to learn through rejection, and this is something that you guys will also learn through rejection. And in fact, by standing here today, telling my story and sharing my vulnerabilities with all of you guys, that is a process, and it demonstrates how I've learned to accept it. I've learned to accept my vulnerabilities and how I've come to embrace rejection. And that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you.